Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras.
And I'm Natasha Kirchak. Coming up in today's newscast, New York City renews its fight against anti-Semitism while Israeli victims of terror take the battle to the courtroom.
The new year is just around the corner, and we're hitting the streets to find out what Israelis are reflecting on the most.
And get ready to laugh because we have the rundown on the most viral Israeli videos of the decade.
Now, to start off our New Year's special today, here's the top news in Israel on the last day of the decade.
Well, New York City is now launching 3 new initiatives to combat anti-Semitism, following a spate of attacks throughout the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah that have left several dead and dozens injured. The NYPD is now planning to increase its presence in Jewish neighborhoods in Brooklyn, and the city will be adding more lighting and security cameras to better protect residents in these areas. The mayor of New York is also creating neighborhood safety coalitions to serve as watchdogs and help the NYPD in its efforts to stop anti-Semitic attacks before they take place. Finally, schools will be adding extra curriculum to focus on stopping hate to address anti-Semitic hatred among school children. Hate crimes against Jewish people have risen by 37% in the last year and account for more than half of all religious hate crimes in the United States, according to the FBI.
For the first time in history, a massive $20 billion lawsuit has now been filed in Israel against the Arab Bank of Jordan for supporting and financing terrorist activities.
The unprecedented suit is the first against a bank for this type of crime, and it's filed by over 1,100 prosecutors, victims, and family of victims of terror attacks committed between 1995 and 2005. Also, the alleged crimes include financing for terrorist attacks orchestrated by Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and Fatah, among others. Attacks like suicide bombings and shootings that have killed hundreds of civilians and wounded thousands more. And the Arab Bank, finally, is alleged to have participated knowingly. The Arab Bank in Jordan is among the largest in the Arab world, and it operates out of roughly 600 branches. The plaintiffs are seeking compensation for special damages, punitive damages, and future damages that can't yet be determined.
Now, just days after responding with airstrikes to Hezbollah rockets and the death of an American contractor, Washington is now backing up their retaliation with a warning for Tehran. ILTV's Nittany Manson has the scoop.
At least 25 Hezbollah terror group members are believed to have been killed on Sunday in the U.S.'s retaliatory strikes in Iraq and Syria. And now U.S. officials in the State Department are reiterating that this was a restrained attack, while warning Iran not to confuse restraint for weakness. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to applaud the U.S.'s action against Iran and its proxies. But some experts believe that the American response is serving less as a deterrence and more as a provocation. In fact, some say Tehran and its proxies may now even increase their actions in the Middle East, especially as President Trump faces impeachment and a fight for re-election in 2020. Additionally, Israeli authorities still predict that Iran will be the greatest threat to the region in the coming decade.
Now, for the second time this week, ancient money has been uncovered in Israel. This time, around 22,000-year-old coins have been found in a wet sifting project in ancient Shiloh, which is a town in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank.
Look at that. That is a coin from the time of Hashmonaim. That's real Hanukkah gelt. The Maccabees who fought here on this land in ancient Shiloh left us a coin.
During the time of the Maccabeans, Shiloh was a common Second Temple period village, but was occupied up until 70 CE. Archaeologists have been sifting through the dirt in the ancient town to see if they can find any historical remnants, and now it looks like they found a Hanukkah surprise.
And now here's some groundbreaking news. Israeli exports have soared by 70% over the last decade, increasing by an average of just over 5% every year. And this year, Israeli exports are forecasted to climb to $114 billion.
So what is Israel exporting? While the hefty increase over the last decade has been fueled by the soaring exports of services, and most notably high-tech exports. Cut diamonds, pharmaceuticals, software, and agriculture products are also among Israel's biggest exports. And where are all these goods headed? Well, over the last decade, the greatest increases in exports have been to China, the UK, Japan, Turkey, and Brazil. Israel's also signed 7 new free trade agreements and is in negotiations to secure new deals with nations including China, Russia, Vietnam, and Kazakhstan.
What does the average Israeli think about the last 10 years? Well, ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh went out to find out.
It's New Year's Eve, which means it's the end of the year, but it's also the end of a decade. So we decided to hit the streets of Tel Aviv to ask the Israeli people some very important questions. What was the most memorable moment in Israel of the decade?
Going to 3 elections in 1 year.
I think the Eurovision. Neta Brazilai, kapara alea.
Trump become president, declare Jerusalem the official capital of Israel, the Golan Heights, moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and so on.
Not a lot of people want to answer our questions today because they're clearly all getting ready for New Year's Eve.
3 פעמים בחירות.
In the last decade, you're losing memory. You see, I'm not as young as you.
I think maybe Protective Edge. I think the Eurovision that took place this year.
I'm in sports, so I think it's the victory over Austria.
What was the most memorable moment in the last 10 years in Israel?
Everything. Everything and anything.
Everything and anything.
Everything.
That's the best thing
Obviously.
that happened in the last
Everything
decade.
happened.
All right, joining us now in the studio to bring in the new year is Israeli anchor and journalist Lital Shemesh and columnist for Newsweek and the editor of HistoryCentral.com, Mark Schulman. So it can be hard to pinpoint what events in the last decade really stood out the most and are impacting not only the news today, but what is going to happen in the next decade. So Lital, I'd like to start with you. What do you think was the biggest event of the decade for Israel?
I think Donald Trump as the president of the United States. Without a doubt, the entire world was shocked to find out that Donald Trump is the new elected president of the United States. I'm sure that Donald Trump himself was surprised to find out that he became president, but I think it was quite a ride. A few years of taking all the politically correctness from the American society, everything that he's done for Israel, and now I'm talking from our personal perspective of having a president that is so pro-Israeli, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, calling the Golan Heights an Israeli territory, everything that he's done, sending Nikki Haley to the UN. I had to pinch myself every time she spoke there. After so many years of having Obama in power, having such a pro-Israeli government was really, really refreshing.
I really disagree with that. I think it was the worst thing that could happen to Israel. and I wrote that before I was elected, and I think it's very true.
Were you surprised that he was elected?
Of course I was surprised he was elected. We were all surprised. Anyone who said he wasn't surprised is lying, let's be honest. Like she said, he was surprised just as much as anyone else was. We were all surprised that he was elected. But I feared he would be elected because I wrote an article the week before he was elected saying why a Jew should not vote for Trump, why it would be bad for Israel and bad for Jews. For Jews, because there would be a rise of anti-Semitism. I said he was not an anti-Semite, but it would cause a rise of anti-Semitism in the United States. And for Israel, it would weaken the United States. And that's where we disagree here, because I think Donald Trump has weakened the United States in the world because he's destroyed alliances. Other countries won't go with the United States in many ways. His abandoning the Kurds was worse for Israel than the positive thing by moving the embassy to Jerusalem. His words are really great. His actions much less so. And I think anything that weakens the United States weakens Israel. And that's why I think that Trump has been a disaster for Israel in the long term.
What about the Iranian deal? The fact that he
was
the first one to withdraw from the Iranian deal. It was really bad for Israel.
No, the Iranian deal was not a great deal, but it's worse now because there was no plan B. Trump withdrew.
The sanctions.
The sanctions were, that was plan A. But sanctions aren't working, and so what's plan B? He has no plan B. That's the problem.
To play devil's advocate, the sanctions seem like they're working. I mean, Iran is being revolted against.
Some revolts is always
countries.
So what? The reality is it's not going to overthrow the regime. The reality is that sanctions this time do not have the Europeans, do not have the Chinese, do not have the Russians, who were together with Obama in terms of sanctions. So single-handedly placing sanctions is almost an impossible thing. So my problem with withdrawing from the deal was not that it was a great deal. I don't disagree that there were problems with the deal. My problem was, what is plan B? Because sanctions are not going to work. Right now we're in a worse situation because the Iranians are breaking out. It's going to leave us alone to have to attack the Iranians, which is a terrible outcome.
I think Donald Trump, for the first time, said to the world, the problem with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is not Israel. The problem is the Palestinians. We need to push the Palestinians. We need to straighten the facts and say to the world, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Israel is not going anywhere. Stop terror. Stop funding terror. 2018 Taylor Force law. The U.S. cut down a third of the money that they're sending to the Palestinians just because the Palestinians are funding terror. And I think that's the way to achieve peace. That is the way. Once you're showing strength in the Middle East, once you're saying we're here and we're not going anywhere, and that's a fact, then you can maybe create some kind of a progress.
So what I would like to do, I mean, because I know that you wanted to speak about Iran and the JCPOA.
Well, I think the JCPOA is also one of the bigger events of the decade.
But Mark, we'd like to hear what you have to say is the biggest event of the decade.
The biggest event,
before we get to
two things. Number one, the major event was the failure of the social protest movement in 2011. Why do I say that was a major thing? Because once Israelis saw that millions came to the streets and nothing changed. The prices have not gone down. Prices continue to go up. The prices of apartments have gone up, and nothing happened. Israelis sort of feel like they can't do anything about it. We have We have 3 elections and 2 before that, where not one party came forward and said, here's my platform of how we're going to change things, how we're going to lower prices, how we're going to lower the prices of apartments, how we're going to do any of those things that they were protesting about. No one seems to care. And Israelis have gotten to the feeling, well, we can't do anything about it. We're stuck in this situation. So the electoral has sort of said, well, we can't do anything. Protests don't work. And so I think it's sort of the result is that Israelis have become apathetic towards so many things because they saw that they came out to the streets in the millions. It wasn't political right-left. It was about particular things, and they couldn't move the needle one bit.
So I just want to give a little bit of background about what you're talking about for those of our viewers who maybe are not aware of this, because this was huge in Israel in 2011. They were called the Israeli tent protests or the social justice protests. We saw, I think, almost 500,000 Israelis come to the streets, actually sleep in tents overnight on Rothschild, which is
some of them are still sleeping in tents.
A main boulevard here in Tel Aviv. And they were protesting the rising costs of housing, living expenses, the rising poverty rates. Israel has the highest poverty rate in the OECD until today, I believe. And so, I mean, Lital, what is your response to that as being a big event?
I can only speak among my friends, and I think they're really not apathetic to the cost of living here in Israel. People are constantly talking about it, speaking about regulation, about the prices of apartments, buying an apartment. I think, and you can also see members of the Yamina Chadash, for example, Matan Kahana, every single day he's uploading a video talking about what measures you need to do in order to take down the prices of living. You do see students talking about it constantly. It is something very debatable.
But it's
in
8 years later, and there's been no progress whatsoever.
Well, are there any sort of policies?
I agree with you, actually.
Kahane was the finance minister for years and years. Is there any sort of policy that he enacted since 2011?
He failed completely. You know, one of the things we have to realize is the land is owned by the government. There is a real simple solution to the cost of housing, and that has to do with releasing land. But the government wants to maximize its income from that land. There was a report just came out, the study came out today from the Technion, that showed how the land authority held on to land during 2008 to 2016 when the prices were going up and limited the supply of land that was available. The government is responsible ultimately for the prices because they own all the land. And the reality is that it doesn't make a difference which party, right, left, center, it doesn't make a difference. None of them are coming up with a plan that says, how do we do something about it? And that's one of the problems.
I'd like to move on from this topic. It is an interesting one to bring up because I think that maybe internationally people were not as aware of kind of, you know, the cost of living, the cost of expenses and housing here and how that was kind of affecting people.
Tel Aviv is the second most expensive city in the world.
Yeah, well, 10th, I believe. I think it's a 10th.
It's still high.
But it's still high. We know that.
Compared to income, it's very, very high.
Tonight when we go out to dinner, we're certainly going to remember
that.
that.
The hotels are the second most expensive.
Okay, but I'd like to talk about Gilad Shalit very quickly, but because we are running out of time, unfortunately. In October of 2011, you guys might remember, the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit was released by Hamas after being held for 5 years, I believe. This is a huge deal because he was actually exchanged for over 1,000 Palestinian terrorists. So in the end, in exchange for his freedom, the Israeli government negotiated with terrorists, which was something that the Israeli government is very, very much against doing. And there was really, I would say, a huge kind of social division as a result of this. I mean, some would say, yeah, the majority of Israelis did support doing anything to get Gilad Shalit out of Hamas, but then there was also kind of the cost of doing that.
And many of those prisoners have been rearrested since then.
Right, and so I bring it up also because I think that one of the things we've seen happen in this decade is, this conversation about the Israeli-Palestinian peace conflict kind of not being one of the most important issues per se of the new elections. The idea of a two-state solution, the idea of peace being the number one cause that our government is going to fight for, not really kind of being at the top of the list. So
because at the end of the day, people lost hope that we actually have a neighbor, that we actually have someone on the other side that wants to live in peace. I mean, we remember the times of the 90s where we had peace rallies. We were hoping to have peace. We were hoping that one day we won't need to go to the army. But after disengagement from Gaza, after the Oslo Accords, after we had twice, 3 times a week suicide bombers exploding in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, people lost hope that we actually have someone on the other side that wants to live in peace. So the only thing that we can do at the moment is guard our borders, guard our civilians, and that's the main approach at the moment in Israel, unfortunately.
I can't disagree with that. I think people have lost hope, and I think we have to maintain some hope, but I have to realize realistically that time and time again it's the Palestinians who said no. Going back to the Peel Plan in 1936, if they had said yes once, we wouldn't have had wars, we'd have peace at any point along the historic thing. All they had to say was yes, but they said no every single time because they really don't want us here. That said, we have to do the right balance. So, for instance, the issue with Shalit that you brought up to begin with was a very, very difficult issue. As a father, you don't want to think of the idea that your child is in captivity for 5 years. On the other hand, the idea that 1,000 terrorists will let go. Or, for instance, right now we have this big issue with the bodies. And, it's a sad situation, but the reality is no one wants to give up a live terrorist for, unfortunately, bodies. And that divides society.
It's a tough topic that will... I don't think it will have any end to this debate going
But I
into
mean,
the future.
I do think the hope that we have now is that the discussion around the conflict is going to change.
Smarter about it as well.
Yeah, in the next
But
decade, right? We have something to look forward to.
Unfortunately, thank you guys so much for being with us.
Thank you. All right, well, after taking a look back, we thought it was important to take a second to look to our future and see what the people of Israel are hoping for in the new decade to come. So, Emmanuel, take it away.
We wanted to know what people's hopes and expectations are for the upcoming decade right here in Israel.
That Tel Aviv continue to lead this country.
Peace. It sounds a bit vague, but peace mainly.
I hope everybody will be more calm, more civilized, less fake news.
אחדות, אהבה, סובלנות ואורך רוח.
Peace, for sure. Spreading the tikkun olam.
Wish everyone in this beautiful world to be healthy, happy, successful.
שיהיו לנו פה, בוא נגיד, חיים סוציאליים, כלכליים יותר טובים, יותר מתחשבים.
A real peace.
ואני מקווה ש-2020 תהיה מוארת ושמחה יותר.
Less elections.
So we will be seeing you guys next year. I know you haven't heard that joke yet, so bye.
All right, now every year it's a tradition to make ourselves some New Year's resolutions. But is this really the right way to start the new year? Well, joining us with the answer is psychologist Dr. Camila Felkosh-Lavan. So tell us, should we be writing New Year's resolutions?
No, absolutely not.
But isn't it good to want to improve yourself and set, these nice goals?
Yes, it's beautiful to want to improve yourself, but when you do New Year's resolutions, a lot of times what happens, people get really, really excited and they want to do this and that and that and the other thing and join a bunch of gyms and do all kinds of things.
Right. Learn Chinese
in a week. Exactly. Except there are no systems on how to actually reach the goal. So what happens is that there is a huge, huge high and there is a huge crash generally after that. Because now this is one more proof of how they're incapable quote unquote,
reaching
of doing
goal.
something. Yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, go ahead.
No, so I was going to say, is it the mechanism, or is it really just the timetable and the pressure that we put on ourselves to reach these goals quickly?
So that's the problem, exactly. It's not the goals themselves. The goals are great, and you can probably reach them most likely. I mean, there's no reason why goals cannot be reached. In fact, they should be, and they should be developed, and people should strive to better themselves.
Right.
The problem is in the timetable, and the problem is on how to actually get there. And many people just don't know how to get there. And with all of this excitement and overload of goals on where they think they will be, they will just end up, for the most part, be depressed.
I never liked writing New Year's resolutions because I don't like the pressure that puts on me. I just kind of like to live my life and try to be the best every day. But why set that boundary or that? I
think having something in mind, concrete, is a good driver to move you in the first place. I think that's.
But I need to write it down and share it on social media?
So no, in social media, no. But it is a good idea. Sometimes for some people, it's very difficult to go from the world of ideas and theories, which could be beautiful and wonderful, to actual concrete. What do I actually do? Mm-hmm. So sometimes it actually is advisable to write down a to-do list, write maybe more general goals, and then break them down and see how can I get one step at a time every day. What can I do in order to get a little bit closer?
But maybe keep it private, off the net or something,
yes.
So you're kind of more in your headspace instead of thinking about what everybody else is saying.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Camila.
So
we will consider what we do this year with our resolutions.
Not me. All right, and now we cannot end our last broadcast of the year without a good laugh.
That's
so
right.
We're about to take a look back at the most viral videos of the last decade in Israel.
I Jerusalem så är idag mer än hälften av alla förskolebarn barn.
I just love how she realizes it. Like, she realizes the camera is there and just doesn't really honestly care. Just walks out of the frame, no big deal. That was actually a woman who was clearly need to get her husband's attention. But up next, we have a more sad reminder of what happens when one slight move can ruin years of hard work.
זה הפאזל שעשיתי עם אבא שלי. זה פאזל של 500.
Oh, that poor kid.
No, wait, it's coming. The best part is coming. Or the saddest part. I know we're not supposed to be laughing about this, but
that's heartbreaking.
This video was it went crazy in Israel. Everybody has watched it like a million times, so we had to show it, even though it is kind of heartbreaking. But moving on, there is nothing like a good group dance to get you moving. Right, Aaron? Check this one out.
That's what I always say.
So many videos like this coming out this year of soldiers doing these coordinated
dances. Really
dances.
active in social media.
Yeah, when they're just
lately,
chilling on base, you know, they're clearly finding something to do.
They're 18 to 20-something-year-olds. It's pretty reasonable.
And yeah,
I
that
guess.
song was a big hit, so
Huge.
you know.
All right, but this next video, which is really fun, and it was everywhere online, it's a look back at music history, Israeli music history through the years.
For all of our viewers out there, if you want to learn all about Israeli music, this is actually an excellent video to look at because it goes through all of the decades of the most popular music in Israel.
It does hit the popular songs.
It does, it does. My father got really excited about that one when he saw it. But on that note, it is time to take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be cloudy with scattered showers in the north and an average low of about 46 or 8 degrees Celsius. And then tomorrow should be more of the same with cool high temperatures averaging just 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 degrees Celsius.
And that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.46 shekels to the American dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube. I'm Aaron Porras.
I'm Natasha Kirchak, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.